Hello there, it's Phil Bowden from Pulse Australia. I'm based in southern New South Wales, and today we have a market update for our Pulse Check groups managed by FarmLink. Information has been provided by Francois Dakar from Agri-Oz Exports and also Adam Robinson from Robinson Grain Trading and from our usual Pulse Australia weekly market reports. The global pulse situation. The total global production is still around 60 to 70 million tonnes per annum, and India produces around 12 to 20 million tonnes a year. But they also consume often more than this, 16 to 25 million tonnes. They're capable of growing two crops a year, the Rabi and the Kharif crop. Lately, the last few years, good seasons in India and tariff protection has meant that they've been quite self-sufficient, haven't needed a huge amount of imports. As far as exporting goes, Canada with their lentils and peas, and Australia with chickpeas and fava beans are generally the largest exporters of pulses. But look, there's increased competition from the USA, from Eastern Europe, particularly the Ukraine and Lithuania, from Kazakhstan and East Africa that can affect export markets. Raising the Pulse is a recent review of global pulse situation completed by Pulse Australia for GRDC. The major outcomes of this are that there are mega trends driving global food markets that are likely to favour increased consumption of plant-based protein. Pulses have a significant role to play in the rapidly evolving food markets, demanding more plant protein. Existing markets, in particular the subcontinent, will remain the backbone of the global pulse trade, but China and Africa will emerge to become even larger consumers. Animal protein production is likely to intensify and requires sustainable resources of feed and plant protein, including pulses, which will be a focus for many rations. Australian pulses have earned a strong position due to the breeding and supply chain focus on clean, quality grain with desired visual characteristics. This report has been done by Pulse Australia, and it looks at opportunities and challenges for Australian pulse industry from 2020 through to 2030. The Australian pulse situation at the moment, we've had record pulse crops, as you recall, in 2015 and 16. We produced around 4 million tonnes of pulses, which includes all the chickpeas, lentils, lupins, fava beans and field peas. Compared to that, canola was around 4 million tonnes as well. And we also had high prices as a result of the demand from India as a result of the drought. In 2017, up until now though, it's been really difficult conditions in many regions. Queensland and northern New South Wales have been hit by drought and by frosts in many areas. But we've had good seasons in many of the other regions. So Western Australia, Victoria and South Australia have all had reasonable pulse crops throughout those years. So total pulses at the last count was around 1.5 to 2 million tonnes per annum production, about half what we did in the record years. So individually, lentils, are still quite difficult to sell. There's still a worldwide oversupply. Bangladesh and India, though, are buyers. Prices around $600 to $700 a tonne. Aussie crop sizes around that 350 to 500,000 tonnes are quite marketable without much problem. When they get larger, they can be a problem, depending on who's produced crops around the world. So we'd be particularly competing with lentils coming out of Canada in particular. But look, we know there's still supplies of lentils in storage, even going back 2 or 3 years. So some of them are being used for stock feed domestically, and the prices aren't too bad. They're above the cost of production. Chickpeas, demand has been pretty static. India has had a good crop, but Pakistan and Bangladesh are still buying. Prices around $600 to $800 a tonne we could expect. There is a bit of a difference from one area to another with what prices you'd get. The ones that are coming out of Queensland are probably higher quality than some of the other regions, so would command a slightly higher price. And look, we've only got a small crop to sell from last year, around a tenth of what we did in the record year, 250 to 300,000 tonnes. So Pakistan and Bangladesh are taking most of that at the moment. Fava beans have been in demand, especially for human consumption. Egypt and the Middle East use a lot of fava beans, especially for feasting after Ramadan. Our stock food, which the domestic prices have still been pretty good. So yeah, prices around 600 to 750 are common for fava beans. The surprise one is Albus lupins. They've been in short supply. So prices around $900 to $1,000 a tonne, not uncommon, which is caused by a demand for both human consumption, going into Egypt again, and the Middle East, but also for local stock food. The aquaculture market like those to feed for fish food. So yeah, good prices for Albus lupins at the moment. Narrow leaf lupins also in demand for stock feed and aquaculture in particular. Yeah, around $700 a tonne. Field peas, again, too, in demand locally. Potential there for pea protein extracts. Prices around $550 to $600 a tonne. Here's a table that shows our Australian crop production estimates for pulses from end of last year. A total of around 1.6 million tonnes. And look, it's about 40% of what our record crop was in 2016. But good production coming out of Western Australia and South Australia and Victoria in particular last year. You can see that Queensland and New South Wales are the lowest. They're often the highest, but were badly affected by the drought. Victoria had some really good crops of lentils, a few chickpeas, and fava beans have all been up in Victoria. South Australia, again, yeah, lentils and fava beans well up. Quite good production of field peas as well. And the big one for Western Australia was the lupin crop. It's the Australian Desi chickpea production graph that we've got here. You can see there over the last 7 or 8 years, we've had a build-up early on, 2015 and 16 and 17 really started to kick the production on. and the last couple of years have shown a decline. We've got about a tenth the production last year compared to 2016 and 17, and that's largely because of the drought in Queensland in particular and northern New South Wales. Here's a graph of our chickpea markets showing over the last 6 years where our chickpeas were being exported to. You can see earlier on 2013-14 we had India and Bangladesh being our main market. You can see as we progress 2015-16, India started to take a lot of our chickpeas, and up to around 1.4 million tonnes went to India in 2016-17. But as the tariff was applied in early 2018, we've had virtually nothing going into India. But look, you can see that Bangladesh there has been fairly consistent, and it's certainly one of our consistent markets at the moment. They've supported us every year. Pakistan too, you can see the green part of the graph there, have been supporting us, less so last year than previously, but still an important market. Some of the others in Middle East and Nepal, for example, have provided some small amount of imports, for their economy. This slide shows chickpea prices going back to 2013. We had a price around $400 a tonne. You can see the price that people were getting in Queensland compared to New South Wales is just slightly higher than the ones for northern New South Wales, and but as we progress up to 2015 and 16, you can see the price rising there. $800 a tonne in 2015, up to around $1,100 a tonne in 2016. You can see there as the demand and the prices have risen there, the prices for Queensland or northern New South Wales grain was pretty much the same. But as the price has dropped, especially with our lack of exports into India with the tariffs, the prices have just separated a bit. You can see lately, even though the prices are still quite good, up around $800 a tonne, the market for Queensland grain is just a bit at a premium to New South Wales grain, and that's because the Queensland grain is usually slightly bigger, slightly lighter coloured DESI chickpeas. That's the preferred option for whole grain going into Bangladesh. Also, you can see that predicted price going into 2020 is around $600 a tonne, and that's going to be consistent. We haven't got a huge chickpea crop to sell, so demand is still coming from Bangladesh in particular, also Pakistan, so prices are predicted to stay around $600 this year. This slide is showing a couple of photographs of DESI chickpea samples. The one on the left there from Queensland, showing a nice even colour, tan large size Desi chickpea and high quality. The one on the right, a sample from southern New South Wales, showing much more uneven colour, lots of broken pieces in that, and would be a second grade compared to the Queensland sample. So this is particularly important for the Bangladesh market. They are predominantly whole seed consumer, so visual quality is very important. It's used mainly consumed during Ramadan to celebrate the finish of Ramadan, so quality is very important to them. And they're probably our main market at the moment for chickpeas. Faba bean markets showing that Egypt is again our strongest market for first grade faba beans being used for human consumption. And again, we're lucky that Ramadan is coming quite early this year. This brings our crop ahead of the ones coming out of Europe or perhaps Eastern Europe. So it's a pretty tough market often. Currency can be a problem. There's a high number of trade defaults. So for our traders, it often represents a pretty tough time, even though we do send a lot to Egypt. Indonesia is quite a developing market for us, particularly for large broad beans. They're doing often 10 to 12,000 tonnes a year. India is important as well, can be quite price sensitive. They'll substitute other sources of protein, pulse protein, in particular peas, if the price goes up too much, and it can be quite variable. We had something like 22,000 tonnes in 2016-17, down to zero last year. Vietnam, important mainly for the aquaculture market. It's growing slowly and it is price sensitive, but they've done 9,000 tonnes in 17-18, and there's huge potential there with their large aquaculture industry. China, again, huge potential. They used to be the largest exporter of faba beans back in the 1980s and 90s, but now they consume all they produce, and they could well become one of the largest importers. So there's interest there, just as human consumption for starch and protein extraction industries that are big there. Market access into China is an issue. There's no phytosanitary protocols. Our grains industry working party are trying their best, but it's really not a priority for Chinese government at the moment. There's lots of other issues ahead of it. The domestic market for faba beans is very strong. All our aquaculture industries are looking at faba beans probably as a preference over lupins. It's got several advantages there. So yeah, prices are strong for that aquaculture industry at the moment. And also we've got this new market for domestic protein extraction. There's a plant under construction in Horsham that'll come online very shortly, middle of this year, hopefully, and it'll increase domestic offtake. They're wanting second grade beans for that market, but hopefully it'll put a floor in the market. So yeah, the faba bean market would greatly benefit from more diversified export and domestic outlets. We're having too much reliance on Egypt at the moment, which makes it a boom and bust situation. This graph shows the faba bean prices over the last 5 years. You can see it's quite variable, a bit of a roller coaster there. Back in early 2015, around $400. It dropped quite substantially back under $200 in 2016 and 17. But the last season, last couple of seasons, it's actually risen and it's up. We had record prices there beginning of last year because there was a huge demand from Egypt for Ramadan, and we were ahead of the other usual markets for Egypt, France and Eastern Europe couldn't supply, so we've sort of got our foot in the door again for that market. It did drop end of last year after that, but has had a bit of a kick. And look, we're hoping that it'll stay around $600 or $700 a tonne at the moment. This slide shows the faba bean export destinations, and you can see there right from the last 5 or 6 years dominated by Egypt. So we're sending around 200,000 to 300,000 tonnes a year, most years to Egypt. So they've been quite a reliable market, as tough as it might be for our traders in dealing with them. The other ones there, Saudi Arabia, are doing up to 100,000 tonnes. Again, it's that market for Egypt and the Middle East that demand these faba beans, especially for Ramadan season. Some other important ones there, though, you might notice is Indonesia, quite consistent, Vietnam and Taiwan, the latter two mainly for the aquaculture market as fish food. This slide shows a couple of photographs comparing first quality light even coloured faba beans compared with dark defective seed uneven coloured. So the price difference here may well be $100, $200 a tonne, so a significant difference. It's quite hard to store faba beans. They start off as a lighter colour and end up darker coloured quite quickly. After 12 months, they'd definitely be degraded to second quality. So they're one of the pulses that are quite difficult to store and maintain quality. The first quality ones would be sent for human consumption. The second quality ones would be used purely for stock food. So quite a price difference there. This slide, I always like showing this one. It shows why we need to stick with India as a trade partner. They're going to be the world's largest population by 2025, overtake China. Currently a population of around 1.3 billion, increased to 1.7 predicted by 2050. They're an economy that's relatively undeveloped compared to China, for example, and they can influence the global supply chain across all commodities, particularly the grains. Their grain production as well, compared to Australia, Australia produces around 45 million tonnes, wheat, barley, canola, all the pulses. Indian grain production is around 5 times that at 240 million tonnes. So they're very productive, but they need that to feed their millions. Their grain stock-to-use ratio, around 12%, one of the world's lowest, represents a month's supply. So it shows that if there's a disaster like a drought or a flood, they're often ill-prepared, and we need to be ready to take advantage of that when they need to import our grain. This is just a few comments about the subcontinent market and why it's so important to us for our pulses. India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh are in general net importers of chickpeas, lentils, peas, mung beans in most years, and they account for around 80 to 90% of Australia's export market for these commodities. Production levels up there are often difficult to predict, but we could say that there are deficits in most years, and they are prone to disasters, being in that part of the world where floods and droughts can often happen. Their monsoon seasons often run a bit late and can affect their sowing or their harvest. So we need to be aware of that because we often have to react quite quickly to their demand. In general though, 2017, 18 and 19, they've had relatively good supply, particularly India. They've had good crops of chickpeas and peas, but one thing that we know of, it can change quickly. Australian produce has a very good reputation for quality, but consumers often don't know that it comes from Australia. We're often exporting things in bulk to them, and they repackage it with their own brand names, so that consumers are generally unaware that it's Australian product. Chickpeas to Pakistan and Bangladesh, mung beans and lentils to India have still been relatively good lately. But we do get increased competition, particularly Tanzania and the Ukraine have been able to market chickpeas and peas into that market that we've traditionally had quite strong links with. A lot of these economies, though, have a enormous appetite for these pulse products. They rely on it, for the basis of their protein intake. So both traditional and innovative products. There has been an increased need for convenience, though, with increase in their the numbers of middle income earners. So reliability, higher value, value-added products, packaging instead of bulk commodity is changing. And as we know, the Indian government has been very protective of their farmers. We've had tariffs up to 60% for chickpeas and bans on some of our products like peas. So they're trying to encourage self-sufficiency up there, and they're very supportive of their farmers. The future looks good, though, for a lot of our pulse crops in general. We've got greater consumer interest in new products, the healthy snack food, for example, chickpea breakfast flakes, lupin superfood, even lentil beer. There's lots of value adding happening in that space. We work in conjunction with the Functional Grain Centre based at Charles Sturt Uni in Wagga, and they've got a very good team down there that look at how we can value add to lots of our grain products, in particular the pulses. So there's lots of research happening there. We've got aquaculture expansion in Asia and Australia driving demand. So lupins, fava beans in particular, being used in that market, and it'll certainly be a way of the future with aquaculture. High livestock prices too have increased local demand for plant protein. The lamb market in particular has had very high prices. There's no end in sight for that, and a lot of that demand is for higher protein to feed livestock. So it looks very promising there. So places like India, China in particular, Asia in general, Indonesia, the Middle East, all have good potential for us to increase our pulse markets. Look, that's the end of our marketing update for you. If you've got any questions, you can forward it to me, Phil Bowden at Pulse Australia. My mobile number is 0427 201 946, and my email is phil@pulseoz.com.au. Thank you for your time, and we're happy to help if you've got any further questions, and we wish you all the best for the coming season. Thank you.